really got to do your homework. Try to talk to people, pick one of the most promising products. I always tell farmers to be sure that there's a specific problem you're trying to fix and a way of measuring progress in fixing that. Because if you don't have a specific problem, then, how are you going to evaluate whether the product worked or not?
As we look ahead to next year's cropping season, we have a better sense of where grain prices are heading. Global stocks are plentiful, so big price rises look unlikely. And with costs still climbing, margins are going to be tight. This means good planning is even more important than ever. It's easy for small costs to slip in, especially with add-ons or supplemental products. But in times like these, every input has to pay its way. You are listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. It's important to know how to assess the real value of crop inputs and whether they can give a return on spend. And to delve into this, I'm delighted today to be joined by Professor Andrew McGuire from Washington State University, a researcher and agronomist working, as he puts it, on evidence-based agriculture. Andrew, you might tell us a little bit about your work at Washington State University and what type of farming is in your general area.
Like you said, I've worked as an agronomist for Washington State University since about 1999. And the region where I work is mostly irrigated agriculture because we get very little rainfall, only about 200 millimeters per year, about 8 inches. But with that irrigation, we can raise lots of different crops. We have potatoes, onions, other vegetables, lots of tree fruit, big apple producer here, alfalfa, hay, corn, wheat, beans. And because of our warm climate with the irrigation, we get high yields. So if I converted the units right, our winter wheat yields are about 10 tons per hectare.
Right, okay.
Potatoes, 94 to 98 tons per hectare. So we get really high yields. And back in 2001, I started writing some blog posts. I've written over 80 since then on various topics, including soil health, soil management, cover cropping, regenerative ag. I'm also active on X, which is formerly Twitter, and that's probably where you encountered me.
I did.
And just one other thing, I looked up my family tree recently for this podcast, and the McGuire side of my family actually came from a farm in County Galway.
Oh, very good. In Galway. Very good.
Yep.
Very good. And they could have been tillage farmers over there. I'm not sure where exactly in Galway. There's different parts of it, but let's just say they were tillage farmers as well. Andrew, just for a little bit of context, because not everybody listening would maybe necessarily in their mind's eye think about where Washington State University, where you were based in. They might be thinking about the capital, but I think you're the other side of the country, are you?
I am. We're on the west side of the country, the West Coast. And it's interesting. We're actually called the Evergreen State. And so the west part of the state is very green. They get a lot of rain, especially in the winter. But I'm on the eastern side of the mountains. We're kind of in the rain shadow of the mountains, and that's why we don't get much rain here. We're dry and brown this time of year, especially.
Very good. That's where the irrigation comes into its own.
Yep. Pretty much the opposite of Ireland.
Andrew, I got you on today just to talk about, and like I say, I've been reading some of your posts online and that, and you very much have an interest in soils and an interest in talking about and maybe researching along the lines of some of the additional additives people can or farmers can put onto their crops. And in Ireland, there's a kind of a growing interest among farmers to use innovative products. They might call them the likes of bio-stimulants or biological kind of things or elements to put on as stimulants to the soil. Is there a similar trend to that in the US as well for farmers?
Oh, yeah. There definitely is a lot of interest here too. Basically in anything that kind of claims to improve biology, whether in the soil or in the crops. The problem here, and I'm not sure about the situation in Ireland, is that most of these products are unregulated. So the market is wide open to questionable claims about the benefits of such products and just the products themselves. There's been some research showing that sometimes, they're saying they're putting on an inoculant and it doesn't have anything living in it. So it's very much like, I don't know, again, what it's like in Ireland, but our human health supplement market. It's kind of we call it the Wild West because it's very unregulated. And so there's a lot of problems with that situation.
Okay. And why do you think some of those products, fail to live up to some of the claims that they have?
Yeah, well, I'm most familiar, and I've kind of thought about mainly the soil products, and there's a lot of reasons these products can fail, but there's two main reasons that I see. First, the condition of the soil that they're applied to doesn't support their survival. I mean, if you're applying some type of microbe, if the soil was in the condition to support a thriving microbial population, you'd probably have whatever you need there or something similar because there's lots of redundancy in the soil microbes. So we're applying stuff to an environment where they can't thrive. That's the first problem. Second problem is kind of related. You've got all these native microbes there. They are well adapted to the soils. They far outnumber what is applied. And so what we apply tends to be outcompeted. And they probably end up as food for the natives. It's like dumping your pet cat into the wild African plains. It's not adapted to the environment, so it's going to end up as food for those predators that are there.
And Andrew, when maybe in some of these products that the claim might be that it's going to boost the natives, if you like, so it's going to add more to the natives, it's going to make it so much better. Does it come down then to a fact that you're putting such a small amount on in whatever format a farmer might be putting it on that it's not practically going to make any difference, even if it had been the same as what's already in the soil?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right for or a lot of the products. The ones that are applying, live, whatever type of microbe. It's really a numbers game. You look, the products will claim to provide billions of microbes, and that's true. But when you do the math, it turns out that the billions is rarely more than a fraction of 1% of what's already in your surface soil. And again, that's why it makes more sense to improve your conditions in your soil for the microbes already there than trying to change your soil by adding new microbes.
Okay. So for farmers then, and it's probably the same in the US as here, if you were given a bit of advice in terms of maybe a red flag, if you like, to a farmer, what should they look out for if a product is being sold to them with lots of evidence or claims, I suppose, about that product by the person selling it? What should they look out for?
Well, getting back to that last point I made, one red flag is when a product claims to do what only really practices, physical farming practices can achieve. We need to realize that there's a lot of research backing these soil building practices. We've got reduced tillage, use of perennial crops, adjustment of your pH, organic amendments like manure or compost, crop rotation, those kind of practices. Unfortunately, they're not very new and they're not very exciting, but those are the practices that create the soil conditions where microbes can thrive. So you build your soil and it's going to select which microbes thrive. Trying to kind of shortcut that whole process by eliminating the practices and just applying these microbes without first using the practices is not going to be successful no matter what the marketing says. So that's a big red flag I see.
Okay. And some of those products can often be accompanied by, a really nice brochure that would show charts and graphs to show, the particular product in a given area that the chart is much higher on this side than it is on the other side where it's not being used. How should people interpret those, or are they something that should be interpreted just at face value?
Oh, definitely not. At least here, like I said, it's an unregulated market, so marketers can make whatever claims they want to. And just because it looks scientific doesn't mean it is. I mean, the process of science, all the replications and randomization of treatments, the comparisons to an untreated check, the peer review, all that goes into putting a research paper together. It's an attempt to measure results with a sort of neutral disinterest in the outcome with the goal of finding the truth. It doesn't always get there because it's run by imperfect humans, but it's far better than just observation. And that's what's really missing in this whole market. Part of the reason is because that of all those checks and that process of science is very slow. it's just never going to keep up with the number of new products, and they come out reformulated products released every year. So farmers are really at a disadvantage here.
Same here. It's very difficult to come up with new evidence when something changes every other year. You might have maybe, Andrew, an example of something some results maybe that you came across that sounded promising, but when you looked in behind it, didn't really stand up to scientific rigor, if you like.
Well, there are examples of successful products that we've had many years around. I think of like inoculants for legumes. You want the legumes to fix nitrogen in your soil, and so you put on this inoculant. But even there are failures of inoculants. Many of the benefits of biological products are really, if you look at them, if you look at the results and they show success, that's often in the lab or in the greenhouse. And then when you transfer that, sometimes they don't transfer it, but if you transfer it to the field, those benefits are often not detectable. That doesn't mean they're not there, but they're usually just not detectable in all that variability that you have in the field, whether it be soil differences or weather differences, year to year differences. And really what we're looking for here are very small differences, because these products really are not going to make huge differences in your production. So the unfortunate fact is that most of these products fail. So when you're looking for one, you're really looking for the exception.
I remember you had, I thought was a really good example of this. You commented on a particular paper where it looked like it was very promising, but I think the commentary that you put in around it was, well, if you look behind this, what the researchers has actually done is autoclaved the soils twice, applied the thing, and they got a result. But I mean, that's not possible.
You really have to look at the methods with how they're tested, because like I said, that's that kind of thing. Autoclaving is going to kill everything off, and then you add something back. Yeah, you're going to find more of a benefit there compared to taking it to the field, where again, you already have all those native microbes out there just waiting for something to be applied that's not going to thrive. And you're basically just feeding those natives. And so that difference between the lab or the greenhouse, in pots, and the field is huge for these products.
So even given that farmers are, especially tillage farmers, I think they're always very interested in trying something new and making sure that they are on top of maybe the latest technologies as far as they see it. Is there any specific things that you would recommend to farmers in the States, of maybe which we can apply over here, where a farmer can try and evaluate that product for themselves?
Yeah, I've thought about this. It's really a difficult thing to do if you're not a microbiologist, first of all, and I'm not a microbiologist. And that's really what marketing takes advantage of. They throw out all these words, and a lot of them are real about these processes going on in the soil. But it really comes back to, in my mind, when you go out to buy any type of product, because we're used to marketing. And the general recommendation of buyer beware, it definitely applies here. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. That definitely applies here. So kind of going through those old adages about marketing, that can help. One thing is to ask about the mechanism, and why isn't it already going on in your soils? Because a lot of these mechanisms where, we come up with a soil discovery, and the marketers take that and say, well, you need to apply this product to get this going. Ask, well, why isn't going on in my soil? Just because we just discovered it doesn't mean that it hasn't been going on for millennia in our soils. Most of our new discoveries are only new to us. They're not new to the soil.
Sure.
Another question is it a shortcut? Getting back to that practices versus products question. Is it a shortcut that tries to get around that, the long-term practices that we use to build soils? Then I'd be skeptical, kind of avoiding the silver bullet solutions.
Okay. But it can often be a case where farmers are, kind of, I know a neighbor down the road, he's only 10 miles down the road or whatever it happens to be. And there's a testimonial from that farmer to say he used this product and the results looked good. How much faith should farmers put into these like testimonials or maybe large demonstration plots where it's a half field of this and a half field of that, or maybe even the company sponsored trials to evaluate these products?
I don't place too much value in testimonials because, we are the easiest person to fool ourselves. We've invested in a product and it's very easily to see what we want to see. And that's exactly why we have so many checks and processes in place in science, because we don't want to fool ourselves as scientists. Demonstrations are fine. I would say if what's been demonstrated has been proven by previous rigorous research. Otherwise, you're again, demonstrations are usually throwing out all those, the replications and all the checks and all that kind of stuff. They're trying to demonstrate something, but if it doesn't have that scientific process behind it, again, it's basically just like a testimonial. Company-funded trials. Now, company-funded trials is different than company-run trials. So I see the funded trials as being, if they're run by a less biased third parties, those are definitely more valuable than company-managed trials. And they should be run with the same rigorous requirements as other research, really.
So I suppose taking on board, buyer beware, which I think is a very reasonable thing to talk about lots of these products. But on the other side of that, Andrew, from what you're seeing from some of the research that's going on in the States, are there any of these types of products that are showing some degree of promise, maybe in specific circumstances, but showing promise nonetheless?
I haven't looked at all of them. Again, there's way too many products out there.
Sure.
I have looked a little bit at the nitrogen fixing products. So this isn't like your legumes. They're called free living nitrogen fixers in the soil. And they've tweaked these bacteria to do a better job at that, because the rates that we measure out in nature are actually quite low. And they've tried to increase that. And I think those products have the potential to replace small amounts of nitrogen in our cropping systems, maybe 30 kilograms per hectare or so. It's not going to replace it all, but and that's more than we actually measure out in nature with these free living bacteria. So it's an improvement on that. So I think there's some potential there, as long as they don't push their claims too much.
Okay.
And then we haven't talked about biopesticides. Biopesticides, I think, probably have more rigorous research behind them, because at least here they're much more regulated. Although they often can't equal the results of our normal pesticides.
When you talk about that, are you talking about fungicides, insecticides, or a combination of everything?
Yeah, biofungicides, bioinsecticides, yeah, all those, just biopesticides in general.
Okay.
They're regulated here. They have to go through a process of testing, and so they're generally going to be more rigorously tested and backed by research than just soil inoculants.
Yeah, well, it's a very similar system here, I suppose, under the European rules, in the fact that if something is claiming it can control whether it's a fungus or a pest, well, then it's going to come under slightly different regulations, and it does have to have good scientific information to prove that. So we're in a very similar kind of position, I suppose. Final question for today, Andrew. What advice would you give to farmers or advisors, indeed, about staying open to some of these innovations while also trying to avoid wasting money on unproven or ineffective products?
Yeah, Michael, that's really the trick, isn't it? Trying to be open to new advances, but avoiding all the hype and the ineffective products. First, I think you got to remember that you can't really bioproduct your way to soil health. You got to focus on those practices that we've known for a long time. They're proven practices that build soil health. They are going to make the biggest difference in the long term. And then if you've done that and you need to, or you just want to try some of these products, you really got to do your homework. Try to talk to people, pick one of the most promising products. But sure, I always tell farmers to be sure that there's a specific problem you're trying to fix and a way of measuring progress in fixing that. Because if you don't have a specific problem, then how are you going to evaluate whether the product worked or not? Is it a problem that your microbial levels are low Or is that just a perceived problem, and that, by adding more microbes, you're going to increase that? But what actual problem does that change for you in terms of crop production? So avoid applying products for the fuzzy goal of soil health or improving soil biology, and focus on, problems that really affect your crop. It's really not easy. So good luck to all your listeners out there that try to evaluate these products. It's a difficult task.
Look, Andrew, thanks very much for that. But from what I can make out from you, even though we talked about all these other different products, it comes back to the boring thing, as you said before: rotation, the right crop choice, the soil nutrient, the pH, and the P's and K's in the background, adding organic manures or organic amendments to the soils. All those, I suppose, very standard practices are the key or the gateway to good soil health, if I'm to understand you correctly.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the key.
Listen, Andrew, thanks very much. We'll have you on again for sure, chatting about some areas in this, and we might come back and maybe talk a little bit more about soils. Andrew, thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael.
We hope to rejoin Andrew later on in the year or early next year. But for the moment, thanks very much to Andrew for joining me on the podcast. So finally, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.